So by the time Scott Kimball lands in custody in the early 2000s, he's already figured out something most people never do. Information is currency.
Cheers! Hello, and welcome to number 63 episode. Oh, I'm sorry, 65. I'm sorry, I'm sleep deprived. This is 65 of Horror Whiskey Company. I am your host, Jamie Knutson. That's my last name.
And I'm your other host, Peter Daly.
Oh, he said his name. Scared. And what we got cooking today, sir?
All right. Today's case, we figured we'd do something Colorado-based, and sometimes, we say, hey, let's find something, we can kind of wrap our heads around. We did, the Jill Coit one, which is located in Steamboat. That was really cool. But you're in town, so we're trying to figure out what we're going to do as far as what's a local Colorado case that would be cool. And you sent me kind of a list of things, and then I started looking into this one. And there's been a couple that are like, oh, there's this killer or this haunted thing. And not that Colorado's lame, but, we're not Washington. I feel like Washington and California and then maybe New York have the big name cases and everyone's there. The Midwest is also just plagued with weird violence all the time.
It's the wooded area.
Yeah.
The rainforest in Washington, you could hide anybody there.
Yeah. It's literally why Gary Ridgway didn't get caught for 30 years. You sent me this story of, we're just going to come out with it, Scott Lee Kimball. And I was like, all right. I look it up and I'm like, this is the most insane story I've ever heard.
You say it. Kind of give a little spurt on what we're getting into with it. So we're going over, we're going to call this The Snitch.
Yeah.
And it's the story of Scott Lee Kimball. We kind of give a little bit of depth to this. Not to spoil it, but during the time that he murdered people, he was actually working as an FBI informant.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to dive in and explain to you.
Yeah.
So what are we drinking? What did we just shoot?
So we are shooting in the spirit of Colorado. We have Law's 4-grain straight bourbon. It is a little spicy, but goddamn is it delicious.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. That got me drunk right away.
Yeah, we're coming in at 47.5.
Yeah,
so
I'm running on hours of sleep and no food. So that got me.
So we're off to a good start.
Well, the beer is this is the same thing as last episode, so we don't have to bore you with it.
Yep. Maybe also out of Colorado, though.
Yeah.
Let's keep that in mind.
Well, let's get into this.
All right. So Scott Lee Kimball was on paper exactly what the FBI wants as an informant. He knew criminals, he could get close to them, and more importantly, he could get them talking. So they used him.
They paid him. They trust him. And at one point, they even helped him get out of jail so he could keep working.
And for a while, that worked.
But while Scott Kimball was helping the FBI build cases, people around him started disappearing.
And these weren't strangers. They were people in his life, people who believed in him, and no one was putting it together.
Because the same man the FBI was relying on might have been the only one they should have been investigating.
And the deeper you go into this story, the harder it is to tell what was real and what was just another lie he sold.
So stick around, because this might be the wildest story that Peter has ever heard and that the FBI has ever handled.
This is the story of Scott Lee Kimball. Now we're going to jump in the time machine and go way back to August 2002 inside the federal prison in Englewood, Colorado. FBI agent Carl Schlaff is looking for his big break. He's been with the Bureau for over a decade. He's worked cases. He knows the job, but nothing that has really moved the needle for him. Nothing that puts him on the map. And then he meets Scott Kimball.
Now, Scott Kimball is a 36-year-old at the time. He's not in prison for anything violent, fraud, forgery, and scams. The kind of guy who lives in gray areas, not someone you immediately flag as super dangerous.
Yeah. What stands out isn't his record, it's how he carries himself. He's confident, direct, and he's really comfortable talking to law enforcement. A real smooth talker, even. Now, Scott hears rumors about the FBI circulating around the prison, and pretty quickly, he brings Schlaff something interesting. He tells him about a fellow inmate, a man named Steve Ennis. Now, according to Kimball, Ennis is trying to arrange a murder for hire, and he's not just talking, he's in the depths of planning.
And Kimball says he can help. He offers to go undercover.
Now, from FBI agent Schlaff's perspective, this is exactly what you're hoping for. You have an inmate who has access, who is willing to cooperate, and is bringing you a potentially violent, if not big deal case. This is the kind of opportunity that turns into something real.
So Schlaff starts working with him. And early on, there's a moment that, looking back, matters more than it seemed at the time.
He asks Kimball a pretty direct question. What's the worst thing you've ever done?
And Kimball does not hesitate. He talks about fraud, scams, lying, but nothing violent, nothing that suggests escalation, nothing that would make you think this guy is capable of something more.
And in the end, that answer matters because it fits perfectly with the version of Scott Kimball that Agent Schlaff is starting to believe in. He's a con man and he's a liar, but he's useful. So the FBI leans in.
They begin building a case around Ennis. They start working Kimball as an informant, and before long, that relationship turns into something much bigger than a prison conversation.
Because what starts here as a simple opportunity is going to lead to a decision that changes everything.
The FBI is about to trust Scott Kimball. And more importantly, they're about to give him freedom.
So from the outside, this looks like the beginning of a solid case. But to understand what they actually let out of prison, you have to go back. Way back. Into the boop, 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 way back machine.
Before Scott Kimball ever became useful to the FBI, he's already been practicing his con man version of himself for years.
Yeah, so Scott was born in 1966 in Boulder, Colorado. And on the surface, nothing about his early life jumps out as unusual. But underneath that, there are cracks. His parents divorced when he's young. And more importantly, there are reports that both Scott and his cousin, this is corroborated, were repeatedly sexually abused by this older man in their neighborhood. Now, Scott later claims this as a defining experience in his life.
That doesn't explain what he becomes, but it's part of the story.
And at some point during his youth, Scott also attempts suicide, and he survives, but he's left with a scar on his forehead that people will later remember. He tries to shoot himself in the face and somehow fails at that.
How do you fuck that up?
I don't know. It's a Fight Club thing.
Yep.
I don't know.
Right,
we don't talk about that. Sorry.
Right in the cheek.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, as he gets older, a pattern begins to form for him.
He's smart. He's social. He knows how to talk to people, but more than anything, he knows how to adapt.
God, that is good whiskey. Okay. He figures out quickly that he doesn't need to control situations with force. He can do it with words, with confidence, with whatever version of himself the moment calls for. And that becomes his thing. Throughout his 20s and into his 30s, it's fraud, forgery, scams, move around, change identities, stay just ahead of the consequences. In 1988, however, he is convicted in Montana for forgery. Later, he runs an illegal outfitting operation, basically scamming people through guided hunting trips. Again, nothing violent, just pure deception.
And then there's his personal life. He moves to Washington and marries a woman named Larissa Hines. They have 2 sons together.
So, behind this facade of the marriage, there are some serious allegations. Larissa later claims that Scott raped her at gunpoint, he had kidnapped and assaulted her, and that he was also controlling and entirely volatile.
Charges were filed, and then they disappear. And that's a pattern, too.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, though, that, like, you see that happen a lot in marriages.
Mm-hmm.
People often in domestic disputes will file charges and then drop them. They're mad or afraid or the opposite in the moment. And then later they take it back, say, hey, I didn't mean it. And it's pretty like common kind of thing. Okay. So anyways, this matters because what Scott starts to learn over time is that consequences aren't as permanent as they should be. If you say the right thing to the right person at the right time, you can get out of almost anything. And at some point, Scott Kimball realizes something else important. If you can convince law enforcement that you're useful, you don't just avoid consequences, you gain leverage, you gain protection, and sometimes you even gain power.
But by the time Scott Kimball walks into the Colorado prison in 2002, he's not just a con man, he's someone who understands exactly how to use people.
So by the time Scott Kimball lands in custody in the early 2000s, he's already figured out something most people never do. Information is currency. Not money, not strength, not intimidation. Information.
If you can give law enforcement something they want, you can stop being a problem. You become useful. And Scott Kimball is very good at being useful.
In 2001, while he's in Alaska awaiting trial for fraud charges, he had this whole case where he pretended to be his brother so that he could get a job in Alaska because he had already had the fraud in Montana and needed to use his brother's ID to withdraw money from his own brother's account. Wells Fargo doesn't take this shit lightly. Mm-hmm. He's in jail awaiting trial for fraud charges. He, at this point, runs into a couple people and starts working as an informant for the ATF, aka the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the government. At first, it's small. He provides information. He helps connect some dots, points investigators in the right direction on cases they're looking into. And then he gives them something bigger. He becomes involved in a case centered around a man named Arnold Flowers. Now, Arnold is a fellow inmate of Scott's who claims that he is involved in a murder for hire scheme.
Kimball helps record conversations. He helps build the case, and from law enforcement's perspective, it works.
Yeah, to investigators, Scott is giving them everything they need for this case. This is exactly what you want an informant to do. He's producing. And once that starts happening, everything changes for Scott because now Scott Kimball isn't just a guy with a criminal record. He's an asset.
And when you're an asset, people start looking at you differently. They start giving you more room, more trust, more benefit of the doubt.
And Scott really leans into that. He begins telling investigators about another man, Jeremiah Jones.
According to Kimball, Jones confessed to the killing of Thomas Wales. This was an unsolved murder of a U.S. district attorney and was something investigators were desperate to solve. He provides detailed information about the crime, like incredibly detailed, almost as if Scott was there, but he never gets addressed. To the FBI, Scott is again just giving them what they need to solve this case.
Yeah, this is like a really strange part of this story. And this is, full transparency. In this case, there is hearsay or theory, and there is fact. And there are certain parts of the case that are solidified in fact. And that's what we're going to get into as we move on through this. This is one of those ones where I don't exactly know what went on, but it does seem that Scott may have actually been involved or had something to do with this case and then just found a random guy that he was with in prison and blamed it on him to the FBI at this point, right? He has moved from the ATF up to the FBI, starts giving them some information on this case that it's the murder, like unsolved murder of a district attorney. It's a huge fucking deal. Mm-hmm. And Scott kind of inserts himself into it and points the fingers at another guy. So anyways, it's a huge claim, serious enough that the FBI also takes it seriously. And again, Kimball positions himself right in the middle of it. He's not reporting information. He's shaping it though. He knows what gets attention. He knows what sounds credible. He knows what the investigators want to believe. And most importantly, he knows how to deliver it in a way that keeps him valuable.
By April of 2002, he's transferred to Colorado. Officially, it's for his safety. He's officially labeled as a snitch. But by the time that Scott Kimball walked into that prison in Inglewood, he's not just another inmate. He's already learned how to play the role.
Yeah, and he's about to meet the person who will give him his biggest opportunity yet.
By late 2020 or 2002, Scott Kimball is sitting inside the federal detention center in Inglewood, Colorado.
At this point, he's already proven something important. He can provide information, he can build cases, he can make himself useful.
So when he brings the FBI something new, they listen.
He tells them about a man named Steve Ennis, another inmate. According to Kimball, Ennis is trying to arrange a murder-for-hire plot, not just talking, planning. This is the initial thing that we talked about at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
We're coming full circle here.
Yeah. And Kimball positions himself right in the middle of it.
He can get close to Ennis. He can gain his trust. He can help build the case from the inside.
And from the FBI's perspective, this is exactly what they want.
Exactly. You have a willing informant, direct access, a potentially violent crime you can stop. So they move forward and they begin working with Kimball on the Ennis case. They wire him up. They give him direction. They start building, to them, something real.
And then they make a decision that changes everything.
So on December 18th, 2002, Scott Kimball is released from custody. Not because he's done with his sentence, but because the FBI wants him out.
They need him on the outside to keep working.
And when he walks out, he doesn't just walk out as a free man. He walks out with support from the FBI and the Department of Justice, money eventually totaling in the tens of thousands of dollars, equipment, mobility, and most importantly, freedom. Real freedom.
He's not just he's not on probation. He's not being watched the way you'd expect because the priority isn't controlling him, it's using him. And Scott understands exactly what that means.
So now he's not just avoiding consequences. He's operating with protection, right? He gets to do whatever he wants, even more than a regular citizen does. From the FBI's perspective, this is a calculated risk. You give someone like Scott Kimball his freedom because you believe that the outcome might be worth it.
Juice is worth the squeeze.
Exactly.
But by the moment he walks out of prison, he's no longer contained.
And the first person he connects with on the outside is going to change everything.
Ugh.
That's a big one.
Ugh.
Good for you.
Ugh, it hurts.
Make it stop.
When Scott Kimball gets out of prison in December 2002, he doesn't jump back into the world. He steps into it with a purpose. Mm-hmm. He's working in the Ennis case, and that brings him into contact with someone important.
This woman is named Jennifer Markham. Now, Jennifer is connected to Steve Ennis. She's his girlfriend. And initially, Scott's contact with her is part of the operation. I would say that this is an odd coincidence, but the work that Scott did with Agent Schlaff was called Operation Snowball, which I thought was really funny. I think it's a Colorado thing initially, but this case just seems to snowball and pick up more and more shit as it rolls along. So I thought that was an oddly apt name for the operation that got Scott Kimball out of jail to start working as an informant. So anyways, that's an aside. Back into the story. Initially, Scott's contact with her is part of the operation. It's approved. It's controlled. It's supposed to help build the case against Steve Ennis. According to Scott, Jennifer is also an integral part of Steve Ennis's murder-for-hire plot to kill a fellow drug dealer. Now, Scott starts meeting with Jennifer outside of what's authorized. He lies about who he is. He tells her he's successful. He tells her he owns a business. Notably, that he owns and operates a series of coffee shops in the Washington, like specifically the Seattle area of Washington. He wants Jennifer to run them for him. He becomes someone that she learns to trust.
But at some point, Scott asks Agent Chef a question. Can he sleep with her?
Yeah, dude.
Hey, is it cool if I sleep with the help?
Yo, I'm trying to get her trust. She don't trust me if I don't bang her. It's one of those
Once my
things.
penis goes in someone, I shoot my trust cannon in. Trust cannon.
Man, that is...
I'm sorry. That was fake.
No. I honestly think you just coined a phrase that I'm going to probably use forever.
Trust cannon?
This here's my trust cannon. It go boom.
Anyways, Slash shuts it down. He says, no, you cannot throw your trust cannon.
Do not insert your trust cannon
inside her hole of sacred. Keep it professional. But by then, Scott already is operating outside of the rules.
Yeah, Scott just continues to see Jennifer independently and obviously unsupervised. And from Jennifer's perspective, there's no reason to doubt him. In fact, Scott is so convincing that the two end up moving in together. He's confident, he's convincing, and whether she knows it or not, he's backed in some way by the FBI, which gives him something that most people don't have: credibility.
So February 17th, 2003, Jennifer Markham is planning to fly to Seattle with Scott to look at the chain of coffee shops. They are last seen packing bags into Jennifer's car, and then she's never seen again. You'd think that this would have been a red flag for the FBI. You have an informant whose job is to watch a woman who is now missing, but Scott has an answer ready. He tells the FBI she wanted to go to New York, that she left him, and then she took off on her own.
Yeah, so this kind of all initially, like, she goes missing for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI is like, hey, how's that case looking? And he's like, what case? Like,
oh, she's gone, dude.
Operation Snowball, man. Remember? He's like, yeah, dude, don't get my snowballs off or whatever. I don't know what he says. He says something stupid because he's really smooth.
He's like, oh, never mind. Oh, that lady? Oh, she left. Let's the next one.
So he tells them about like this ridiculous story where like he was sent out there to try to mitigate a murder for hire plot. And instead of Jennifer being the contact between Steve Ennis and a killer, Scott says that she just decides to go do it herself. And there's this guy all the way out in New York named Jason Price. I don't actually know if it's even a real person. It's a very good name if you're trying to have someone that's not John Johnson or something like that. But anyways, I'm sure you can find at least 3,500 Jason Prices in New York City.
Sure.
So I'm just going to guess that this whole thing was made up and that Scott Price wasn't even a real person, but maybe it was. Or Jason Price wasn't even like a real person, but he claims that she's left town and is going to New York. And the FBI is like, hey, why don't you tell us? We're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We don't need you just be in Colorado. Like, you can tell us if things are traveling across state lines. He's like, well, I couldn't follow her, so I didn't really know what to do. I'm a felon on parole or like on release, so I can't go after her. He pretty much spins this whole yarn about how, yeah, she's gone. She took off to New York to go kill this guy. I don't really know what to tell you. And for a while, that's the explanation that honestly works and holds. First of all, there's no evidence of any foul play. There's no body. There's no crime scenes. There's just a person that has gone missing. Her car is eventually found at DIA. Yes, that DIA, which may be a coincidence. I don't know. If you guys want to hear all about DIA, turn into episode 6, 7.
I don't remember. It's a long time ago. I think it's not a coincidence about the DIA missing. I think it's just the fact that they live in Colorado.
Yeah, it's the only airport.
So I don't know what you're fishing for. If you're trying to get people to listen to that episode, there's a lot of controversy on DIA.
Yeah, I think
that's
that
a coincidence.
DIA was pretty much founded upon people going missing. So, anyways, that was my point.
Oh, I didn't
and
get it.
The alien overlords that may or may not control all of our thoughts and actions and maybe trying to ruin us. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So, anyways, we get back to the fact that her car is found at DIA, which on the surface supports the story, but there's a problem. There is no record of her getting on a flight, and even then, it doesn't immediately snap into place because at this point, Scott Kimball is still the informant. He's the asset. He's the guy that's helping build the cases. So instead of becoming the focus, he becomes the explanation. The story takes an even crazier turn later when Scott claims the drug dealer Jennifer went to murder actually ended up killing her. So he goes to the FBI after a couple months. When they find her car, they're like, hey, where is she? And he's like, oh, actually, yeah, no, she got murdered by that guy, Jason Price. And they're like, are you fucking kidding? It's like, no, swear to God, dude, I'll take a polygraph. Passes the polygraph, right? And then, because this information is a little bit public, Jennifer is now presumed to be dead. Her family gets in touch with Scott, and they arrange this like a couple different meetups. One, there's this thing where he's going to take them up to the hills, like the foothills outside of Denver, and that's where her body is, which is really weird. And he says that her dad isn't allowed, but the mom is allowed to come with him. They're like, hey, we're not going to do that. So anyways, later, they arrange to meet up at a hotel somewhere in Denver. And this is where her mom almost becomes a victim. So Scott wants to meet up, and there's some legal loophole where he can't tell Jennifer's mom what happened to her, but he is allowed to show it. Now, this is not a real legal loophole. It's something that Scott is making up and is trying to convince the family, specifically the mom, to come meet him privately. And she shows up to this hotel, and he's saying, hey, I can show you what happened to Jennifer. And it's like, well, that's super fucking crazy. Later, we find out that he had this like legal document that he intended for Jennifer's mom to sign, saying that she was okay with engaging in like pretty much BDSM type sex, where she would be bound and tied and like hurt. Really weird, fucked up shit. But they don't have that happen. Even that, she is supposed to meet with Scott at his place. He says no, or she says no. Then he shows up at her place and is like, hey, if you don't want to do it, I'll find a prostitute that can if you're still interested. And she's like, no, I'm definitely okay. I don't need to know how my daughter was murdered that bad.
So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Very long.
Sorry, got a little confusing.
Yeah.
Anyways, Scott is trying to... So Jennifer's family is looking for her. They're wondering what happened. And he has the answers. And he's saying, oh, I have pictures. I've seen pictures of what happened to Jennifer, and I can depict them for you. I just can't tell you what happened. It's a legal loophole that I can't quite do it because I'm an FBI informant, so I'm not allowed to, because it's an ongoing case. Some bullshit that he feeds the family. So anyways, Jennifer's mom, like, is inches away from becoming another victim of Scott's. But after all of this craziness, after Jennifer's disappearance gets absorbed into Scott's story, it kind of just fades away from the memory of the FBI.
At this point, it still looks like one person's missing. A strange situation, but nothing definitive. But Scott Kimball doesn't stop. The next relationship he builds is going to make everything much harder to ignore.
Yeah. Not long after Jennifer disappears, Scott Kimball meets another woman. Her name is Lori McLeod. They meet at the Lodge Casino in Black Hawk, Colorado. Love it. We've been there. on the show, I think. Yep. And from the start, Scott does what he always does. He adapts.
With Lori, he doesn't come in as flashy or impressive. He comes in as helpful, reliable, someone who seems like he has his life together.
Yeah, he tells her he works for the FBI. He claims he's an agent. And at this time, he doesn't just say it, he shows it. He has a badge. And
A laptop?
Really funny. He has a laptop
Okay.
with a sticker on it. And it says FBI, and then I think underneath it says full body inspector.
It's a female body
inspector. I think that's what it says, but she didn't see that part. I'm joking, but like it has to be that ridiculous. He has this, like, literally his laptop has a FBI sticker on it, and she believes that makes him someone with authority. And whether it's real or not, it's real enough for Lori, and she believes him. And over time, he becomes part of her life.
But Lori isn't alone. She has a daughter, Casey McLeod. Spelled so weird. Casey is 19 years old. She's had a rough path, struggled with addiction, but she's trying to get back on track.
Yeah, and Scott inserts himself into that world too. Not as a threat, but as someone like he might actually be able to help, which makes what happens next that much worse. We're going to jump to August 2003. Scott approaches Lori with a vial of drugs, claiming that it belonged to Casey and her boyfriend. Now, Lori is furious, as Scott knew she would be, and Casey denies that the drugs are hers. But Scott puts himself in the middle of the two of them, isolating them from each other. He'll talk to Lori and smooth this all out, and in the meantime, he rents a motel room for Casey and her boyfriend until the heat dies down with her mom. Now, during this time, according to Casey's boyfriend, Scott shows up to the motel with his truck and a tow-behind camper and offers Casey a ride to work at the local subway. And then Casey McLeod disappears. The last person known to be with her is Scott Kimball. And just like before, he has an answer.
He tells Lori that Casey ran off, that she left on her own, and that she'll come back. Casey's boyfriend tells Lori that Scott picked her up. To Lori, Scott refutes these claims by saying that Casey's boyfriend was high on drugs and making things up to ruin their relationship. The boyfriend doesn't go to the police because he's under the belief that Scott is an FBI agent and he's just one to toe out of line from going to prison. So immediately after Casey's disappearance, Scott does something that makes it even more unsettling.
Yeah, within 2 weeks of Casey going missing, Scott and Lori run off to Vegas and they get married. But as the weeks go by, Casey doesn't turn up. Now, there's some weird things that Scott does here. He has a necklace that he hangs on Lori's front door that belonged to Casey. He uses that as saying, like, yep, Casey's still around. She's still out there. He also moves a makeup. What do they call it?
Like
bag container. I don't know. Yeah, he moves a makeup bag from Casey's room into the living room or something like that, saying like, oh yeah, she came by, see some of the things are missing. Again, he sees all these things. He kind of starts to frame things, but the most fucked up thing is that he's now married to Lori and he decides to console her and offer support. He positions himself as someone who can help find her daughter. Now he boasts of his FBI connections and puts himself as their contact with local and federal law enforcement. However, no contact between Scott and any police was ever made during this time. Now, all of this is happening while he was the last known person being seen with her. And I think that's why he kind of threw himself in to completely gum up the works of what an actual investigation into this case would look like. And again, this doesn't immediately click because no one that has the authority to investigate knows that he's the last person seen with her. At this point, Scott has something working in his favor. He's not just a guy to these people, he's a connected man. He's someone who claims to be working with the FBI, someone who speaks with confidence, and someone who always seems to have the right explanation.
And for Lori, in the middle of fear and confusion, there's something left to hold on to, even if it shouldn't.
So now there are two disappearances. We have Jennifer and we have Casey. Both are connected to the same man. But instead of things tightening around Scott, he's still moving freely. Even if when warning signs start to appear, they don't stop him.
By the time Casey McLeod disappears in August of 2003, there are already signs that something isn't right with Scott Kimball. There's just not being taken serious enough.
Yeah, some of those warning signs are even coming from inside the system. Earlier in 2003, agents out of Seattle take a closer look at one of Kimball's claims. That story about Jeremiah Jones confessing to killing a prosecutor, remember that? It's a huge claim, so they test it.
They polygraph Kimball, and the results come back. Deception indicated. In simple terms, they don't believe him.
And internally, concerns are raised. Kimball is honestly described as unreliable and untrustworthy. Someone who may be manipulating the information that he's providing to officers. But that concern doesn't stop everything, because back in Colorado, FBI agent Carl Schlaff is still working with him. He still believes in the value that he's providing. He still sees him as someone useful, and that belief carries a shit ton of weight.
So instead of shutting things down, they continue forward.
But the cracks are beginning to show in the facade of Scott Kimball's perfectly tailored life. Now, at this point, the signs are there. Questions are being asked, doubts are forming, but none of it is quite enough to stop him. And while the system hesitates, the damage continues.
By 2004, Scott Kimball is still moving freely, still operating, still, in some ways, protected by the role he has built for himself.
And around him, things keep happening. Not clean cases, not obvious crimes, just like more damage. One of the most disturbing moments involves his own son. This is July 14th, 2004. Scott is with his young son, Justin. Now, at some point during the day, Justin is seriously injured. First, a metal grate falls on him, cracking open his skull.
Then, on the way to the hospital, he falls or is thrown out from his dad's vehicle. Yeah, fucking right.
So, and we haven't talked about this, and we'll get into it a little bit more later, but Scott and Lori opened a business somewhere down the I-25 corridor. I'm going to be classist here or locationist here and say it's probably close to Greeley. They open a beef business where they are raising cattle that are farm-raised, organic. All of this is in quotations because none of it is real. In fact, for the most part, they are buying sick cows from farmers and then shipping that beef out to other people. But anyways, they're living on this ranch, and this cattle grate somehow falls over and lands on his own kid's head. And then while he's driving his own kid to the hospital, the kid falls out of the car. Now, this result is catastrophic. Justin suffers severe head trauma. He's placed into a medically induced coma. But when he regains consciousness, he says something that shocks and sticks with people. He asks, "Why did my dad do this to me?" Now, it should be mentioned that weeks before this incident, a life insurance policy was taken out on Justin by his own father, Scott Kimball. But despite this, there's no clear resolution. It seems to be just chalked up to the most ridiculous and unfortunate set of accidents that have ever occurred in human life. There's no charges. There's also some jurisdictional issues that complicate things. And like so many other moments in Scott's life, it doesn't land the way it should.
It just fades. But it shouldn't, because it shows something important. There isn't just manipulation anymore. There's violence here, and it's getting closer to home.
Around that same period, another person enters the story. Terry Kimball, Scott's uncle. Now, at some point, and I don't know all the details on it, but Uncle Terry comes into money. And not long after, Scott reconnects with him. Then, Terry disappears. And once again, Scott has an explanation ready.
He says Terry won the lottery in Ohio and went to Mexico. That day he left with a stripper named Ginger that he chose to disappear with.
And once again, there's nothing immediately there to prove otherwise. There's no body and there's no clear evidence, just another person gone and another story to explain it.
At this point, there are too many incidents to ignore completely, but they still aren't being connected, not formally, not in the way that forces action.
But outside the system, something is starting to shift because the people closest to those disappearances aren't letting them go.
By 2003 and into 2004, the official picture still unclear. There's no confirmed murders, no bodies tied directly to Scott Kimball, just disappearances.
But for the family, this isn't abstract. This is real. Jennifer Markham's family is searching. They're putting up flyers and following leads. They're trying to understand how someone can just vanish. And to them, nothing makes sense because Jennifer didn't just disappear. She left behind a whole life. And the explanation they're being given, that she just took off, doesn't sit right.
At the same time, Lori McLeod is dealing with something even more personal. Her daughter, Casey, is gone. And the person helping her process that is the same man who was last seen with her. Scott stays close. He consoles her. He offers explanations. He reinforces the idea that Casey ran away.
And in the absence of answers, that version holds. At least for a while. But over time, that uncertainty starts to shift. Because when you live with something like that long enough, you start asking harder questions. And eventually, those questions start pointing in the same direction. And at the same time, another family is dealing with a similar kind of confusion.
A woman named Leanne Emery disappears. Her car is found abandoned in Utah. No clear answers, no strong investigative push. Just another case that doesn't quite go anywhere.
And again, Scott Kimball is somewhere in the background. Now, Leanne Emery actually had gone missing in January of 2003, immediately after Scott's release from prison in Colorado under the conditions of him serving as an FBI informant. What would later be learned is that Scott was cellmates with the man named Stephen Hawley. Now, Stephen Hawley had a plan to break out of jail, but he needed some help. It just so happened that Scott was slated for release, and being that he was his cellmate, he offered his services to Steve Hawley. So Steve Hawley put Scott in touch with his girlfriend at the time on the outside, our aforementioned Leanne Emery, who was going to help Scott get Steve out of jail and smuggle him to Mexico. This is like a weird, not really integral part, but a chilling detail of this case is that Scott's nickname in prison was Hannibal, as in Hannibal Lecter, because of his smarts, his intelligence, and more importantly, his ability to manipulate people. Anyways, when Scott is released from prison, he immediately connects with Leanne, and the two go on a multi-week crime spree, committing fraud in several states along the West Coast. Pretty much, they leave Colorado. They have multiple cases of fraud in Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, and then the case kind of like the trail kind of goes cold. Leanne even buys a gun, later assumed to have been for Scott. Scott would not have been able to purchase a weapon as he was a registered felon. All of this information was given to police by Leanne's parents in Denver. But once again, Scott was seen in close proximity to another person, but he's not charged and he's not accused. He's just present, and that's the pattern. Different people, different places, same man. And eventually, those stories start to overlap. Not officially, not yet, but through the people who are closest to them.
Fathers start talking, comparing details, looking at timelines.
And what they're realizing is simple, but it changes everything. Scott Kimball isn't just connected to one disappearance anymore. He's connected to multiple.
At this point, this isn't just suspicion anymore. It's a pattern. And once that pattern becomes clear, it's only a matter of time before someone inside the system sees into it.
So, in early 2006, Scott Kimball isn't being hunted for murder. He's being investigated for fraud. There's this crazy case involving a dentist in Colorado, where somehow he was able to gain access to his information and was writing checks to himself that were then sent to his business. The whole thing is really convoluted, but the money being moved through the accounts don't make any sense.
On its own, it's a solid case, enough to issue a warrant, enough to bring someone in, and that case lands on the desk of a detective named Gary Thatcher.
Gary Thatcher.
We've heard this name before, Sam.
I don't know if is he the dude that was involved with the
Orange socks? No, well, another time. But
that could be.
That name sounds very, very familiar.
Okay. At first, it's straightforward case. Follow the money, track the checks, identify the suspect. And that suspect is Scott Kimball. But as Thatcher starts digging, things stop being so straightforward.
The fraud leads him into a business. The business leads him to people. And eventually, it leads him to Lori McLeod.
Yeah, earlier we talked about this awful fucking meat business, like, I don't know, beef cow business that they were running, that pretty much they were buying sick cows and then selling that meat to anyone that would buy it.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, it's super.
How's that legal? Yes, it's not.
It's not. For sure. It's definitely not. Scott does not exist in the legal realm of things.
No.
You're right to question it.
And that's where things change. Because during that conversation, something comes up that just doesn't fit.
So Lori tells this detective that Scott works for the FBI, that he's connected, that he's helping on FBI cases. And at the same time, her daughter Casey is also missing. And they're divorced now. She believes Scott actually was the last person to see her. So it's not just fraud anymore. Now there's a question, who is this guy really? Thatcher starts pulling on that thread.
He looks deeper into Scott's background, finds the prior charges, finds the movement between states, finds the inconsistencies, and then he reaches out to the FBI.
And he gets in contact with Agent Carl Schlaff. And that's when another piece kind of drops into place, because when Thatcher brings up Scott Kimball, Schlaff brings up the case of Jennifer Markham. Schlaff is very aware of the debacle that happened with Jennifer Markham. And suddenly, those two separate stories are no longer separate anymore. They overlap.
Fraud, Casey McLeod, Jennifer Markham, same man. And at that point, the realization hits.
This might not be a coincidence. This might be something much bigger.
At this point, Scott Kimball isn't just a suspect in a fraud case. He's potentially connected to multiple disappearances. And now the focus shifts. Once Gary Thatcher realizes that Scott Kimball may be tied to more than just fraud, things start moving quickly. Because now there's a reason to act, not just to investigate, but to contain him. The fraud case becomes the key.
Yeah, it's clean, it's provable, and most importantly, it gives them some leverage. A warrant is issued for Scott Kimball in Colorado, but when they go to pick him up, he's not there. He's actually in California. And when law enforcement locates him, he runs.
What follows is a massive police pursuit. Multiple agencies, high speeds, long distances. He drives for hours across highways, through traffic, off-road, flies in space. And at one point, he's on the phone telling someone that if he stops, the police are going to kill him. The chase stretches on for miles until eventually his car runs out of gas.
And just like that, it's over. He's arrested. And for the first time, really, in this story, Scott Kimball is physically contained. He doesn't have a way to talk himself out of this. Not because of the disappearances and not because of the growing suspicions, but because of fraud. And at this point, that's enough because now they can keep him in one place and start figuring out what they actually have to build a case.
Around this same time, another key figure steps in. FBI agent Johnny Grusing.
Yeah.
Grusing isn't coming in blind. He's already familiar with Scott Kimball. He's been present during earlier interactions. Sean knows how he operates. Sean knows how staff has worked with him, and now he's looking at him from a different angle, not as an asset, as a subject.
So this guy, Johnny Grusing, is a really interesting person in this case because he is the person that eventually, because it's a multi-state crime spree that he is on between the frauds and the murders and all of these things, he's the person that ties this all together. But what is interesting is that FBI agents, just like regular police, often work in pairs. And he was pretty much like the understudy or like the younger partner to the guy that was Scott Kimball's handler.
Okay.
Is what they call him. As this is happening, something else occurs that also changes the trajectory of this case. The families step forward. Now, the fathers of Jennifer Markham and Casey McLeod come to Johnny Grusing. And what they tell him, honestly, is simple. Scott Kimball was the last person known to be with both of their daughters.
2 separate disappearances, same man. And at that point, it's no longer abstract. It's no longer a loose connection of concerns. It's a pattern. And it's a pattern that now has a name attached to it.
Yeah, from there, everything starts tightening. The investigation shifts, resources change, focuses sharpen. Because now they're not just dealing with fraud, they're looking at the possibility that Scott Kimball is responsible for multiple murders.
Multiple murders.
For multiple murders. Murder.
At this point, Scott Kimball is in custody. The pattern is clear. The investigation is focused, and now they need proof because suspicion is not enough.
They need something that turns all of this suspicion into a case that sticks.
Wow. With Scott Kimball now in custody, the investigation shifts from chasing him to building the case. And at this point, they have a theory.
Yeah, we have multiple missing people all connected to the same man. But a theory just isn't enough, right? They need something real, something physical, something that proves that this isn't all just a coincidence. And that break comes from something very small.
A receipt. During the investigation, agents uncover a Walden, Colorado receipt tied to Scott Kimball. It places him in a specific area at a specific time at right around when Casey McLeod disappeared. And that's enough to focus the search.
Yeah, apparently it's a gas station receipt of Scott literally just filling up for gas in the town of Walden, about an hour from where we are. If you drive fast.
Damn near.
Look at his hat. So law enforcement sees this and is like, what is going on here? They begin combing the area. It's incredibly remote, isolated, the kind of place where something could stay hidden. All around Walden is national forests. It's pretty much this small, it's got to be less than 500 people that live there. Maybe 1,000.
Yeah, it's like a hunting, basically busy for hunting, and that's it.
It's a stop through town on the way to
Laramie.
Yeah, Laramie or
Fort
Fort Collins.
Yeah.
From US 40, which is where we are. So, anyways, they find something. Agent Grussing reaches out to local law enforcement, and this is like a crazy kind of part of this case that I don't know how often this happens, and maybe it happens more often with like smaller police departments, but he's like, hey, do you guys have any missing remains or like any human remains that have been found in the last, I don't know, let's call it 2 or 3 years? And they're like, oh yeah, we have a skeleton actually that was like a skull that was found by a hiker out in the national forest. And they're like, really? You didn't test it? And they're like, no, we don't have that kind of technology. They're like, wow, can we? So Agent Grossing asked to have that skeleton tested for DNA, and it does turn out to belong to Casey McLeod. The breaking point. Everything changes.
Because now there isn't just missing persons case anymore. There was a murder.
It was a murder.
And not just a possibility, a fact. And once that door opens, everything else starts to move faster.
Because if Casey was killed, what about the others? Jennifer Markham, Leanne Emery, Terry Kimball. The pattern they suspected now has legs, and the man at the center of it is already sitting in custody.
At this point, they finally have what they need to confront him. Not as an informant, not as an asset, but as a suspect.
Bam!
And then what comes next isn't about catching Scott Kimball. It's about getting the truth out of him.
Yeah, so once Casey McLeod's death is confirmed, the pressure shifts immediately onto Scott Kimball. He's no longer an informant. He's no longer useful. He's no longer protected. Now he is the center of the case.
At this point, law enforcement needs one thing: information. Because they know that there are more victims. They just don't know where or how many. So they make a deal.
Yeah, in exchange for cooperation, in exchange for cooperation with Scott, he agrees that he will lead them to the truth. At first, it kind of looks like it's working. He starts talking. He gives them locations, stories, explanations. Apparently, he's a pretty talented artist. I listened to this whole interview that Johnny Grissing did, where he talks about the maps that Scott was drawing to where these bodies were hidden, and he's like, I don't know how he could remember it, and I also don't know how he had this much talent at like literally drawing. Like, he should have been a map maker.
Oh wow.
The dude's incredibly talented. Also, it's not surprising that he has like very good fine motor skills, like specifically because he's always doing fraud, like forging signatures and things like that. I imagine he's quite artistic. So anyways, not autistic. Maybe he's autistic. I guess I don't know. I didn't check that. Yeah, he's probably still on the spectrum though. Anyways, he gives them locations, stories, and explanations, but almost immediately there's a problem. He's still Scott Kimball, and Scott Kimball doesn't just give information. He controls it.
He takes investigators to a location that leads to nowhere, wastes time, creates confusion, sends them in the wrong direction. Even now, he's manipulating the process. But eventually, some of what he says leads somewhere.
Yeah, he spent years just saying that, and it's again, like, he's such a con man that he spent so much time telling people, like, oh yeah, I can tell you where that body is. You just got to take me there and I'll lead you right to it. And then he wouldn't. And this happened, like, I don't know how often it happened, but I'm guessing from what I could tell from the Grussing interview, it happened like 15 times or something like that they would take him out of his very, very small jail cell out into the real world for him to go walk around in the sunshine and go maybe say, oh yeah, maybe it's over there. I can't quite remember this or that. But anyways, we finally get to Leanne Emery. Now, he tells investigators that he shot her. The shocker in this case is that it is with the gun that she bought for him because he was not able to buy the gun for himself, if we remember that. He left her in a remote area outside of St. George, Utah. Search teams go out and they actually do find her remains. Another confirmation, another victim tied directly to him. And then Terry Kimball, his own uncle.
Scott leads them to a location in Colorado near Vail Pass. And again, they find him. And at that point, there's no question anymore. There isn't isolated. There's a pattern of murder.
And yet, even with that, they have one person that they can't find. Jennifer Markham. Now, Scott gives them stories and different locations. This is the one that I'm mostly talking about, where he says, oh yeah, I can take you right to her. And then he's like, oh, I forget. And they spend the entire day wandering through like the foothills of Rifle and stuff like that. He just has different versions of what happened, but none of them ever lead to her.
And over time, it becomes clear he's not telling the whole truth. There's a theory that starts to take hold.
Now, this theory goes that the reason he never gives up Jennifer's location is because she might not be the only one buried there. That revealing her could reveal more bodies. And that is something that he is not willing to do. Now, at this point, they have enough to move forward. Multiple victims, confirmed evidence, his own admissions. But even with all of that, the story isn't super clean because Scott Kimball doesn't stop lying just because he's caught.
By 2009, Scott Kimball stands in court and pleads guilty. 4 murders. Casey McLeod, Leanne Emery, Terry Kimball, and Jennifer Markham.
Even though Jennifer's body is never found, he still admits to it because he knows that if he doesn't own up to it, they're going to keep investigating, right? And in exchange for that plea, he's sentenced to 70 years in prison. Now, there's no trial, there's no drawn out process, but what the crazy thing, he can be eligible for parole in 35 years.
Wow.
He was sentenced in 2009. Okay. So we are talking 2046. So 20 years from now, he is eligible for parole and is actually eligible. That was also a stipulation in his case, is that he is not allowed to be denied parole.
Oh, wow.
For pleading guilty to these murders. Now, that is just the ending on paper.
But the reality of Scott Kimball doesn't end there, because even after sentencing, he keeps talking. He creates documents, fake FBI reports, 302s that look official, but they aren't.
So 302s are standard in, I don't know if it's all law enforcement, but it is specifically an FBI form. It's kind of what we would call like a summary report. You meeting with someone or you having a conversation with someone, you type up pretty much a review of it's a report document is what a 302 is.
Okay.
So at this point though, he's inserting new names and new stories. There's new versions of events. He claims he had accomplices, that other people were involved, but none of it holds up. But that isn't the point.
The point is, he's still doing what he has always done, controlling the narrative. And even from prison, that doesn't stop.
At one point, he's caught trying to arrange another murder from inside his own cell because the environment changes, but he doesn't. Agent Grossing caught him in this. This dude, obviously, this is a big fish for an FBI guy. And he, has said that he will spend his entire life until he dies, because he's older than Scott, watching him. Because he knows how dangerous he can be. And he, in this interview, it was super interesting. He talks about how Scott had made a friend who was getting released, and he was able to somehow give this guy $100,000 to open his own helicopter tour business.
Okay.
Near the prison.
Right.
And his job was to come get him at some point. And this guy, Johnny Grushing, the FBI agent, who took over after Agent Schlaff was dismissed in like not a great fashion, obviously. He definitely like fucked it up. He talks about how he wanted to rent a helicopter from that guy and have it land and have him literally show up and step out of the helicopter in the yard. When you look back at the whole story, there's a thread that runs through all of it.
Not just violence, not just deception, control. Scott Kimball doesn't see himself as a killer. He sees himself as a con man. Someone who told a story and got people to believe it, even when the truth was right in front of them.
And in the end, that might be the most unsettling part of this, because it wasn't just criminals he fooled, it was the FBI. It was the people closest to the victims. And for a long time, it worked.
4 confirmed victims, a real possibility that there were more. Because when someone is good at lying, it's hard to know where the story ever actually ends and the truth begins.
That is the story
of Scott Kimball?
Scott Lee Kimball.
Damn. So he's in jail in Colorado, I assume, right now?
He is in Colorado. Yeah, he's in, what is it, Florence?
The one right outside of Colorado Springs, I assume?
Yeah. The Max.
Where all the big...
He's in the Max. He's hanging out with those guys. He's somehow, with his deal, eligible for parole. And with how... I want to talk about how smooth he could be. I can see it, man. Like,
he's never interviewed him.
He's done some interviews.
Nice.
Yeah, dude, he loves to talk.
Oh, that's what I said. I was like, I want to watch an interview from him in prison of him telling his own story.
He's just so far up his own asshole. He seems that like you really it's interesting because I watched one of the interviews with him, and he like. It's one of those ones where he like tries to blame it on other people and says like, oh, like it wasn't just me. Like I was there, but I didn't do the killing kind of thing.
Just trying to push it off like with no name or anything. Yeah.
The Jennifer Markham thing has always been interesting. He claimed that, that one dude killed her. And then with, Leanne, he claims that the cartel kidnapped her from him.
Of course.
And then took her down to Mexico and he was there though, brought him with her and then murdered her in Mexico, trying to relinquish any responsibility at all, is his thing. So he's a piece of shit, but this is a crazy story that I didn't expect to hear from Colorado.
No.
I'm pumped that you gave me this, and I was like, I don't know, I'll check out. And you had like 3 or 4, and as soon as I hit that one, I was like, wait, he's an FBI informant that was like released out of jail when he shouldn't have been.
So all this could be prevented.
Yeah, if he had just stayed in jail, none of this would have happened. Because literally, the murders that he is convicted for all occurred in like a very short 1.5 year period of him being released by the FBI to be an informant. Jennifer Markham was not the first. She's actually after Leanne. And then we have Casey, who was immediately after Jennifer was killed. And then his uncle was one of those cases that's like, I think he just, and you, again, you asked about like interviews, stuff like that. He always says that he just did it for the money.
Wow. Whatever happened to his son? Is his son alive?
He is alive. Wow. He is okay. They don't get along.
Look, that's crazy.
Big surprise. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode.
We did it.
Drunk.
We're not talking about
we're not that. We're not.
Horror
we're not
Whiskey
that.
Company.
We're Horror Whiskey. I'm just getting there.
Oh, I am there, dude. That one shot got me like re-drunk from the.
This is like the most delicious whiskey I've ever had.
I don't know if it's the most ever.
You want a little sip?
No, I've
Just a
had
tiny
it.
little sip?
No,
You're not going to get drunk off
Okay.
one sip, dude.
I've had it already.
That is fantastic.
With all that being said, please, if you like us, please hit the subscribe button. Follow us on all social media things. We're there. Tell everyone about it. Keep listening. We love you. Please stay wicked.
Stay weird.
And stay
wasted.